Where have you been? Where have I been? Let's find out.
It's time for another show from Colin Jones, the Reasonable Adventurer. Time for you to take another step towards creating your own opportunities for satisfaction.
And it's a huge welcome to you all to episode 97 of the Reasonable Adventurer. I got to tell you that the weeks have flown by so quickly. I found myself in a situation where I just ran out of time to create episode 97 a few weeks ago it is now. And then when I was traveling overseas, I forgot to take my equipment with me. And I thought, here we go. And then still when I got back, life's just such an avalanche of things that need to get done. And then one of our long-time listeners and great men in general, Tom Williamson in the UK, asked me the question this morning, what's going on? Where's the show? And very good question, Tom. And I think we better get back into the saddle and we better get things moving forward. And it's been a very interesting time. And I thought today I would just sort of touch on a sort of another metaphor, you know. It's interesting putting a show together. You sometimes think to yourself, well, what's the new idea I'm going to talk about? And then sometimes you think, maybe there isn't a new idea. Maybe there's just a repackaging of existing ways that we think about. And when I was coming back on the plane recently, I got this idea in my mind, the challenges that if you can imagine a whirlpool, right? And you've got this, gravity almost bringing things towards the center and then down and gone forever, yeah? And I like the notion of whirlpools. I like the idea that we can recognize that there are forces around us that are trying to sort of bring us in to line with and then take us away from where we're at, right? And alternatively, in an entrepreneurial mindset type of space, we can think of the alternative forces, okay? And I think this is quite an interesting challenge for us to actually recognize, I spend a lot of time with students talking to them about invisible things and getting them to try and understand the consequences of them being surrounded by that energy. The things that they don't necessarily see that they could tap into. But it also goes the other way, doesn't it? There's also that challenge that there are things around us which just keep pulling us and taking us away. And we don't always recognize those factors. And I think when you get a chance to sort of just step out of your life and the access to the phone and certain things, because you're overseas, you're in a different context and time is operating a little bit differently, then you can recognize there's a bit of freedom, I think everybody, when they travel somewhere, it creates hassles for you when you get back because you've got a bit of a backlog of work. But it does also afford you a little bit of freedom, right? I mean, if you're on a plane for 15 hours, you don't have to worry about emails, okay? You can check out and just watch some movies or do something else, or sleep maybe even, if you're lucky enough. And so I think not recognizing that there is this sort of constant centrifugal forces which are pulling us, right, into this space, right? And whether we like it or not, someone pays us a salary, right? And they expect something for it, right? And so we have to go to work. And part of our work is being accountable to other stakeholders. In my case, a whole bunch of students who expect you to do the things that you say you're going to do on the, when you say you're going to do them. And so we have, within those systems and processes, there's this sort of centrifugal force which just keeps pulling us from the outside. We're sort of reaching out because there's something we would love to do. We'd love to go and spend time reading a book, or we'd love to just spend time thinking or talking to people, or maybe even just spending time with family. But there's this thing that just keeps pulling us back, right, into this little central area. And if we're not careful, down, and maybe we're gone. Alternatively, we can think about the difference to this. And I remember when I was a very young, very, very young man, and I was doing a diesel fitting apprenticeship. And, we were in the workshop and we were talking about the fact that diesel engines, if they get up and running, they can just have a mind of their own. So how would we govern this? And that is the actual mechanism, a governor. And a governor is designed to do the opposite, right? It's throwing these weights out. So now, rather than centrifugal forces, we're talking about centripetal forces. So it's now things are being pushed out as opposed to going in. Have I got that around the wrong way? Don't think it matters too much, to be honest with you. Anyway, what is it about you that's enabling you to work back the other way, right? What is it about you that's actually enabling you to actually reach out and sort of resist this temptation to be sucked in? And I suppose to try and find this sort of your own preferred alignment of your inner and outer worlds. And over the last few weeks, I found myself connecting to some older ideas, and they just have so much relevance in today's life. And it just keeps reminding me that, I listened to this really cool presentation on plagiarism. And what made this presentation so interesting was the degree of provocation it had. Is it possible for a musician to actually create anything that's truly original? Do all the riffs and all the other bits and pieces that comprise a piece of music, are they already there? Can all we do is just, try to innovatively recombine them and put different emphasis in different areas, right? And then it makes you wonder. We've been thinking about how, say, firms survive and operate, and we've been thinking about that for a long time. And we've got all sorts of new theories that get put forward. They're not really theories, to be honest with you. They're really just little slices of an existing theory, trying to, demonstrate the value of that theory or the application of that theory in certain contexts or the things that stop that from working, and so on and on and on. And I came across this work from the 1950s by Roe Alderson. And it's interesting how marketers now have almost forgotten who he was, right? And yet when I read through his work, I think, wow, if he was sitting here next to me now, we'd be having such a collegial conversation about our shared view of the world. And it just reminds you that it's very easy to be living in a parallel universe. Someone's already walked that street before you. Someone's already had that thought, right? So now you can innovatively recombine things and reapply things. And I like it. I don't feel the pressure to have to come up with some incredibly new idea. I like living 50 and 100 years ago and trying to understand through people's writing how they saw the world and how they explained the world that they saw. And then trying to make sense of, well, have we moved on? Have we quashed that now and sort of said, well, that we know that doesn't actually happen anymore, right? Or are we still there? Are we still in and around that space? So I love being able to connect in a new way to old ideas. And I think that's one of the challenges we've got, because we find ourselves repeating the history of our lives, don't we? And not just our lives, but other people's lives, continually making the same mistakes, right? And, I had a wonderful opportunity to watch a presentation by a lady in Wales. And she was using this theory called activity theory. And I sat back from it and I thought, wow, it's such a generic process. You could apply that to any activity. And pretty much everything in the world is an activity. So, and that really, really got me thinking. And so now I've developed some ideas around that and shared that with some other colleagues around the world. And we can think, gee, this is pretty cool, right? There's definitely something here for us to sort of keep this thing moving forward. So I think this notion of whirlpools has got me sort of, I feel like I'm the traffic person. I'm stopping the traffic and trying to start the traffic, and I'm trying to weave my way through the traffic. I'm aware that there is this flow. I can't stop the flow. That is our life, the things that are, continually calling and making demands upon our time and attention. But there is this other energy source that, your curiosity and your passion that wants to take you in another direction. How can you find this balance between this inner world and outer world? The outer world is the thing that just wants to represses the wrong It's the wrong descriptor, but maybe keep us accountable, right? And I always think back to it, especially in my world as an academic, we're paid well to think and do these other things, like deliver a class and do some research and whatnot. But ultimately, people do want us to think. And not many people get paid to think, right? It's quite a luxury, really. When I think back to the other occupations I've had in my life, cleaning toilets that might have had, I remember, I used to have like 300 people would come on this boat, and then when they left, they'd leave at like 3:30, and I wanted to get there. I was only like 15. I wanted to get to cricket training at 5, so I could be there at the start of training. But to do that, I had to clean the toilets, right? It's amazing what 300 people can do to a toilets or a toilet block across a day, right? And sometimes we would have people who, they weren't exactly, coping with the rigors of society very well. They may have been, quite disabled in many senses, and their aim wasn't very good, and that would be tough, right? And I think about being, a diesel fitter and crawling underneath some things, and it's wet, it's rocks, it's heavy, you're smashing your fingers apart, and it's really, really tough, but very creative work that you're trying to do to try and solve those problems in foreign environments. I think about being a financial advisor. I think about starting franchise groups and running other businesses in education and agriculture. And I think about all those things. And then I look at what I'm doing now, and I think to myself, wow, this is pretty amazing. None of that really seems to have been directly connected to what I do now. And now I'm sort of being paid to think. How did you get there, right? So if you have this luxury, if you have this opportunity to think, to be paid to think, and you don't think, it's almost a crime against yourself. Because at the end of the day, we're all going to be gone. None of us are going to survive forever and a day. And the only thing we can really leave beyond our family, maybe our values, which live on in our family members, from an academic sense, is our ideas, right? And our recombination and admiration of other people's ideas. And so, for me, being able to avoid that sort of pulling power of life, which wants to sort of just keep dragging you and sort of controlling aspects of your disposition, for me, it's curiosity. Right? It's genuine interest in other people's thinking. And most probably my greatest weakness is that I have less interest in current people's thinking than I do in older people's thinking. And there's definitely a risk there of going off and developing, a line of reasoning only to find out that people have already walked that path 10 years ago and dismissed it or done it better or whatever the case may be. But I wonder where you're at in that sense. I'm curious to know how much reflection that you've actually been able to be engaged in over the last few weeks, right? I haven't been prompting you, hey, so where are you at with this? And so is it something that you've naturally been continuing to do, right? I've been loving reading my students' reflections. For many of them, it's their first time, properly reflecting. And it's just a joy to be able to read those things. And but I wonder how you find the balance between this thing we call life, which is trying to sort of drag you in and down into this particular space that sort of almost stops you from being able to do the other things in life that maybe give you energy, maybe give you hope, maybe give you a passion, a curiosity for other things. So there's a challenge for you, right? To actually have that conversation with yourself in relation to what would it take for you to be able to find this balance, right? Between where you're at, the forces that are trying to sort of push you and pull you in one direction, and the sort of direction you'd like to be on, right? None of us get to just go exactly where we want to go, but, the general direction that you'd like to be on, yeah? So listen, that's episode 97. I'll try not to make it a month before we have episode 98. In fact, I'm sure now we're back in the saddle, and I know that Tom's out there concerned about me, we'll get back into our normal swigger. I have been trying to plan something for episode 100, and I keep moving around my thinking on what that might be. So all I can say is stay tuned, keep reflecting. Cheerio.